Every parent knows that sinking feeling when you can't provide what your child needs. Cal Monroe felt it every day after his wife died, watching his 10-year-old son Eli dream of underwater adventures while Cal worked double shifts just to keep the lights on. One day, Cal bought a $3 book from a thrift store, hoping to keep his boy's dreams alive. Inside that old book was a World War II naval logbook with coordinates to a sunken battleship called the Valiant. What started as a father-son trip to explore an old wreck became the discovery of $25 million in hidden treasure, smuggled gold, priceless art, and military secrets buried for decades. But when word got out about their find, Cal faced an impossible choice: cash in to save his family or protect history and risk losing everything. Would this incredible discovery bring them closer together or tear apart the only thing more valuable than any treasure? The trust between a father and his son. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock's harsh buzzing cut through the pre-dawn darkness at 4:30, same as every weekday for the past 2 years. Cal Monroe's calloused hand slapped the snooze button with practiced precision, then lingered on the nightstand where a framed photograph of his wife Sarah smiled back at him. Her warm brown eyes and gentle expression had once been the first thing he saw each morning, but now the photo served as both comfort and painful reminder of everything he'd lost. He rolled out of bed, his back protesting the movement, a souvenir from years of hauling cargo containers and loading freight at the port of San Diego. At 42, Cal felt older than his years, the weight of single parenthood and financial stress etched into the lines around his eyes. He padded quietly down the narrow hallway of their modest apartment, pausing at Eli's door to listen for the steady breathing that confirmed his son was still asleep. The kitchen was cramped but functional, typical of the low-income housing complex, where they'd moved after Sarah's medical bills consumed their savings. Cal started the coffee maker, a luxury he justified because it was cheaper than buying coffee at work, and surveyed the stack of bills on the counter. Past due notices from the electric company, a final warning from the landlord about next month's rent, and Eli's school fundraiser packet that might as well have been written in a foreign language for all the activities they could afford. He picked up Sarah's wedding ring from the small dish beside the sink, turning the simple gold band between his fingers as he did every morning. 2 years since the cancer took her, and he still couldn't bring himself to put it away. Sometimes he caught himself reaching for it during difficult moments at work, drawing strength from the weight of it in his pocket. Sarah had been the dreamer in their relationship, the one who believed in possibilities beyond their circumstances. Without her, Cal felt like he was just going through the motions, keeping his head above water for Eli's sake. The coffee finished brewing, and Cal poured himself a large mug, adding sugar but skipping the cream they couldn't afford this week. Outside the kitchen window, the harbor was coming alive with the distant sounds of cargo ships and forklifts. The port of San Diego had been his workplace for 15 years, starting as a temporary job after high school that somehow became permanent. When Sarah got pregnant with Eli, it wasn't glamorous work, loading containers, operating cranes, managing shipments, but it paid decent wages for a man without a college degree. At least it had, until the shipping company downsized last year and cut his hours. Now he worked split shifts, mornings at the port and evenings at a warehouse across town, leaving precious little time for the thing that mattered most, being present for his son. Cal showered quickly and dressed in his work clothes, steel-toed, boots, worn jeans, and a company shirt that had seen better days. He prepared Eli's breakfast the night before: peanut butter and jelly sandwich, an apple, and a thermos of milk. Not the nutritious variety Sarah used to pack, but it was what their budget allowed. Before leaving, he checked on Eli one more time. His son slept peacefully, dark hair tousled against the pillow, clutching a worn copy of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Even in sleep, Eli's imagination lived underwater, exploring coral reefs and discovering sunken treasures. The boy had inherited Sarah's sense of wonder, her belief that the world held infinite mysteries waiting to be uncovered. Eli's bedroom walls were covered with pictures of sea creatures, maps of ocean currents, and hand-drawn sketches of submarines. And diving equipment. His latest obsession was marine archaeology, the scientific study of underwater artifacts and shipwrecks. Cal had checked books out from the library about underwater exploration, watching his son's eyes light up as he read about ancient civilizations and lost vessels. It was one of the few things that brought genuine joy to their modest life. The morning commute to the port took 20 minutes through neighborhoods that grew progressively more industrial. Cal's pickup truck, a 15-year-old Ford with more rust than paint, coughed and wheezed, but still ran. He'd learned basic mechanical skills from YouTube videos, performing repairs in the apartment complex's parking lot because professional mechanics were beyond their means. At work, Cal fell into the familiar rhythm of manual labor. The port was a maze of shipping containers, cranes and cargo vessels from around the world. He worked alongside men who'd become friends over the years. Jimmy Rodriguez, who shared updates about his daughter's college applications. Frank Chen, who brought homemade lunch and stories about his grandchildren. Marcus Thompson, whose wife had also battled cancer and understood the weight of raising children alone. During lunch break, Cal sat on a concrete barrier overlooking the harbor, eating a sandwich and thinking about Eli's latest request. His son wanted to join the school's Marine Science Club, which included a field trip to the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. The cost was only $50, but it might as well have been $500 given their current financial situation. Cal had promised to think about it, knowing full well he'd find a way to make it happen, even if it meant skipping meals for a week. The afternoon shift at the warehouse was always harder, his body already tired from the morning's work. He unloaded trucks and sorted packages until 8 o'clock, when exhaustion settled into his bones like an old friend. The drive home took him past the thrift store where he sometimes bought Eli's clothes and books, a small place called Second Chances, run by an elderly woman named Mrs. Peterson, who always seemed to have exactly what they needed, at prices they could afford. Tonight, something made him pull into the parking lot. Through the window, he could see a display of books near the front counter. Eli's birthday was next month, and Cal had been worrying about what to give him. A new book about ocean exploration might not compare to the expensive diving equipment his son dreamed about, but it would show he was paying attention to what mattered to the boy. Mrs. Peterson smiled when he entered, her silver hair pinned back and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. "Evening, Cal. How's that? Son of yours?" "Growing too fast," Cal replied, making his way to the book section. "Still crazy about everything underwater." "Ah, young explorers," she said warmly. "I might have just the thing." She led him to a corner display where maritime books were arranged on a small table. Most were romance novels with ships on the covers, but one caught his attention. Maritime Mysteries, Lost Ships of the Pacific. The cover showed a ghostly vessel beneath dark waves, and the back promised stories of forgotten wrecks and underwater discoveries. $3, Mrs. Peterson said, noticing his interest. "That one's been here for months. Previous owner was quite the collector, brought in boxes of books about ships and sailing, said his father was in the Navy during the war." Cal flipped through the pages, noting illustrations of sunken vessels and maps of dive sites. It wasn't exactly scientific, but Eli would appreciate the adventure stories and historical details. He handed Mrs. Peterson the money, feeling good about his purchase for the first time in weeks. Back home, Eli was at the kitchen table working on homework, his brow furrowed in concentration over math problems. He looked up when Cal entered, his face brightening with the kind of pure joy that made all the long days worthwhile. "Dad, how was work?" "Same as always," Cal said, ruffling his son's hair. "But I found something that might interest you," he presented. The book with the ceremony it deserved, watching Eli's eyes widen as he examined the cover. Maritime Mysteries, the boy read aloud. Lost Ships of the Pacific. Dad, this is perfect. They spent the next hour at the table, Eli reading passages aloud while Cal helped with the remaining homework. These quiet evening moments were what Cal treasured most, when the financial pressures and daily struggles faded into background. Noise replaced by his son's animated voice and curious questions. As Eli prepared for bed, he carefully placed the new book on his nightstand next to his other treasured volumes. Thanks for the book, Dad. Maybe someday we can explore a real shipwreck together. Maybe we can, Cal said, meaning it more than his son could know. Good night, buddy. After Eli was asleep, Cal sat in his worn recliner with a beer and the remote control, but found himself picking up the maritime book instead. He flipped through it absently, reading about famous shipwrecks and underwater archaeological discoveries. The stories were fascinating. Tales of vessels lost to storms, war and human error, along with the modern efforts to locate and study them. He was nearly through the book when something crinkled between the pages. At first, he thought it was a bookmark or receipt left by the previous owner, but when he pulled it free, he found himself holding several yellowed pages covered in careful handwriting. The paper was aged and brittle, with water stains along the edges that suggested it had survived some kind of moisture damage. At the top of the first page, written in faded blue ink, were the words, "Personal Log, USS Valiant, Final Mission 1943. Cal's pulse quickened as he read the opening lines. This wasn't part of the book. It was an actual naval logbook, apparently tucked between the pages and forgotten. The handwriting was precise and formal, documenting coordinates, weather conditions, and cargo manifests in the methodical style of military record-keeping. According to the log, the USS Valiant was a destroyer that had been converted for special transport duty during World War II. The final entries, dated September 1943, described a classified mission to evacuate priority assets from the Pacific Theater as Allied forces advanced. The ship had been loaded with what the author called cultural preservation materials and strategic resources before departing from the Philippines. The last entry was particularly intriguing. Heavy weather encountered off San Diego coast, taking on water. Captain has made decision to beach vessel at coordinates 30°39'N, 117°14'W, rather than risk total loss. Cargo secured in lower holds. Recommend future salvage operation when conditions permit. But that was where the official log ended. Below, it in different handwriting and darker ink, someone had added a personal note. They declared her stripped and abandoned, but that's not true. Everything's still down there, waiting. The coordinates are exact. God forgive us for what we've done. Cal read the entries 3 times, his heart racing with possibilities he didn't dare acknowledge. The coordinates placed the wreck somewhere, off the coast near Point Loma, in waters that were certainly accessible to small boats. According to the log, the USS Valiant had been deliberately beached rather than sunk in deep water, which would make it diveable for someone with basic equipment. He glanced toward Eli's bedroom, thinking about his son's dreams of underwater exploration and archaeological discovery. This could be exactly the kind of adventure the boy longed for, a real mystery to solve, a genuine piece of history to uncover. But Cal was a practical man who'd learned that dreams usually led to disappointment. The ship had been abandoned nearly 80 years ago. Even if it still existed, it had probably been discovered and stripped clean decades ago. The cultural preservation materials mentioned in the log were likely just military equipment or supplies, nothing of real value. Still, as he folded the pages carefully and placed them inside the book's back cover, Cal couldn't shake the feeling that he was holding something significant. Sarah had always said that the best adventures begin with a single step into the unknown. Maybe it was time to take that step, for Eli's sake, if not his own. Outside, the harbor lights twinkled in the distance, and somewhere beyond them, if the log was accurate, the remains of the USS Valiant waited in the Pacific darkness. Cal finished his beer and headed to bed, but sleep was slow in coming. His mind kept returning to those coordinates, to his son's fascination with underwater mysteries, and to the possibility that sometimes, just sometimes, dreams might actually come true. The next morning arrived gray and overcast, typical for early October in San Diego. Cal had barely slept, his mind churning with questions about the naval logbook tucked safely in his nightstand drawer. Over breakfast, he watched Eli methodically eat his cereal while reading a library book about underwater archaeology, completely absorbed in photographs of divers exploring coral-encrusted shipwrecks. "Dad," Eli said without looking up from his book, "did you know that most shipwrecks from World War II have never been properly explored? The ocean is like this huge museum that nobody's visited yet." Cal nearly choked on his coffee. "Is that right?" "Yeah, and some of them are in shallow water where regular people could dive to them, not just scientists with expensive equipment." Eli turned the page, revealing a cross-section diagram of a sunken destroyer. "I wish we could find one someday. Just imagine what we might discover." The synchronicity was almost unsettling. Cal set down his mug and studied his son's eager face. "What would you say if I told you I might have found something interesting in that book I bought you?" Eli's head snapped up, his dark eyes bright with curiosity. "What kind of something?" Cal retrieved the logbook pages from his bedroom, handling them carefully as he returned to the kitchen table. He spread them out between the breakfast dishes, watching Eli's expression transform from curiosity to wonder to pure excitement. "Oh my God," Eli whispered, leaning over the yellowed pages. "Dad, this is real. This is an actual naval log from World War II. It was tucked inside the book. I almost threw it away, thinking it was just scrap paper." Eli traced the faded ink with his finger, careful not to touch the fragile surface. "USS Valiant. I've never heard of her, but look at these coordinates. They're really specific." He pulled out his phone, a basic model Cal had bought for emergencies, and started typing. "Can I look this up?" "Go ahead." For the next few minutes, Eli navigated various maritime databases and historical websites with the kind of focused intensity he usually reserved for video games. His fingers flew across the small screen, cross-referencing ship names and coordinate systems. "Dad, this is incredible," he said finally. "The USS Valiant was a real ship, but there's almost nothing about her in the official records. Just basic information. Built in 1941, served in the Pacific Theater, declared lost in 1943. But look at this." He turned the phone toward Cal, showing a brief entry from a naval history website. "It says she was stripped of valuable materials and abandoned due to structural damage. But the log says something completely different." Cal read over his son's shoulder, noting the discrepancy. According to the official record, the Valiant had been thoroughly salvaged before being left to sink, but the handwritten log suggested otherwise, mentioning cargo secured in lower holds, and implying that valuable materials remained aboard. "These coordinates," Eli continued, pulling up a mapping application, "they're only about 12 miles off the coast, in maybe 60 feet of water. That's totally diveable, Dad. People explore wrecks like this all the time." The excitement in his son's voice was infectious, but Cal forced himself to remain practical. "Even if the ship is still there, buddy, it's been underwater for 80 years. Anything valuable would have been salvaged long ago." "But what if it wasn't?" Eli's eyes shone with possibility. "What if whoever wrote that personal note was telling the truth? What if there really is stuff down there that nobody knows about?" Cal studied the logbook again, focusing on the mysterious final note. The handwriting was different from the official entries, more emotional and urgent. "God forgive us for what we've done." What did that mean? And why would someone go to the trouble of hiding these pages in a random book if they didn't believe the information was important? "Tell you what," Cal said, making a decision that surprised him. Why don't we take a trip to the library today, do some research on this ship, see what we can find out? Eli practically bounced in his chair. Really? You mean it? I mean it. But we approach this scientifically, like real marine archaeologists would. We gather all the facts before we make any decisions about what to do next. The San Diego Public Library's Central Branch was a massive modern building downtown, with extensive databases and research resources. Cal and Eli spent the morning in the history section, pulling books about World War II naval operations and Pacific theater campaigns. Eli proved surprisingly adept at research, taking careful notes and cross-referencing different sources. What they discovered was fascinating. The USS Valiant had indeed been part of a special transport division in late 1943, tasked with evacuating valuable materials from territories that were about to be overrun by advancing Allied forces. However, the ship's final mission remained classified, with most details still redacted in official documents. "Look at this," Eli said, showing Cal a passage from a book about wartime art preservation. It says that as the Japanese retreated from the Philippines, there were rumors about stolen artwork and cultural artifacts being moved around by various parties. Some of it was recovered after the war, but a lot just disappeared. Cal frowned. "You think that's what the log meant by cultural preservation materials?" "Maybe. Or it could have been gold or military intelligence or who knows what else. The point is, there was definitely valuable stuff being transported on ships like the Valiant. They spent another hour researching diving and salvage law, learning about maritime heritage protection and the legal requirements for exploring historical wrecks. California had strict regulations about disturbing underwater archaeological sites, but the law also recognized the rights of finders under certain circumstances. "We'd need to get permits," Eli explained, reading from a state website, "and we'd have to report anything significant we found. But Dad, we could actually do this. We could be the ones to solve this mystery." Cal looked at his son's animated face and felt something he hadn't experienced in years, genuine hope. Not the desperate hope of a man trying to keep his head above water, but the excited anticipation of someone embarking on a real adventure. "What would we need?" he asked. "Hypothetically speaking," Eli was ready for the question. "Basic diving gear for both of us. Masks, snorkels, fins, maybe some simple scuba equipment. A boat big enough to get us out there safely. Underwater lights, cameras, if we want to document anything. I've been reading about this stuff for years, Dad. I know exactly what we'd need." Cal did quick mental calculations. Renting a boat for a weekend would cost several $100s. Basic diving equipment would be another few hundred, even buying used gear. It was money they didn't have. Money that should go toward rent and groceries and Eli's school expenses. But as he watched his son sketch out dive plans and research equipment specifications, Cal realized this might be more important than practical concerns. For 2 years, he'd been focused solely on survival, working enough hours to pay the bills, keeping Eli fed and clothed and in school. He'd forgotten about the importance of dreams, of giving his son something to be excited about beyond the daily grind of their modest life. Sarah would have said yes without hesitation. She would have found a way to make it work, because she understood that some experiences were worth the financial sacrifice. Maybe it was time for Cal to channel some of her optimism, her belief in possibilities beyond their circumstances. "Okay," he said finally. "Let's say we decide to check this out. How would we go about it?" Eli's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Seriously, you'd actually consider it?" "I'm not promising anything," Cal warned, "but let's explore the options. Maybe we could plan a camping trip to the coast, rent a small boat for one day, just see if we can locate the wreck. If it's there and it looks safe, maybe we do a little surface exploration." For the rest of the afternoon, they researched boat rental companies and diving shops, mapping out a theoretical weekend expedition. Eli proved surprisingly practical when it came to safety considerations, insisting on proper equipment and emergency procedures. This wasn't just childhood fantasy. He was approaching the project with genuine scientific curiosity and mature planning. As they drove home that evening, Cal found himself actually looking forward to their potential adventure. It had been years since he'd felt this kind of anticipation, this sense of possibility extending beyond the next paycheck or rent payment. Even if they found nothing more than an empty hull, the experience of exploring together might be worth more than whatever treasures they'd imagined. "Dad," Eli said as they pulled into their apartment complex, "thank you for taking this seriously. I know it probably sounds crazy to you." Cal parked the truck and turned to face his son. "You know what sounds crazy to me? The idea that we'd ignore something this interesting just because it's inconvenient. Your mom always said that the best adventures begin when you least expect them." Eli smiled, clutching the photocopied pages of research they'd gathered. "She really would have loved this, wouldn't she? She would have been the first one in the water," Cal agreed, feeling Sarah's presence like a warm current between them. "And she would have made sure we did it right, safely, respectfully, and with proper appreciation for whatever history we might uncover." That night, as Eli fell asleep with diving manuals spread across his bed, Cal sat at the kitchen table with the original logbook pages. He read through them again, paying attention to details he'd missed the first time. The personal note at the bottom nagged at him. "God forgive us for what we've done." It suggested guilt, possibly regret about abandoning valuable cargo or failing in some important mission. Tomorrow, he decided, he'd start making serious inquiries about boat rentals and diving equipment. Not because he believed they'd find treasure, but because his son deserved to have his dreams taken seriously. And maybe, just maybe, they'd discover something that would change their lives in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The coordinates seemed to glow on the page. 30 Sukugur 39 N, 117 to 14 W. Somewhere out there in the Pacific darkness, the USS Valiant waited. The following Saturday dawned clear and calm, with minimal wind and excellent visibility. Perfect conditions for their first expedition, to locate the USS Valiant. Cal had spent the week making arrangements, using his credit card to rent a 20-foot fishing boat from a marina in Mission Bay and purchasing basic diving equipment from a used gear shop in Ocean Beach. The financial strain made his stomach tight with anxiety, but Eli's excitement was infectious. His son had spent every evening after school researching diving techniques and maritime archaeology, taking detailed notes and creating checklists with the methodical enthusiasm of a born scientist. "Remember, Dad," Eli said as they loaded their equipment into the rental boat, "we're not treasure hunters. We're marine archaeologists conducting a preliminary survey of a potentially significant historical site." Cal smiled at his son's serious tone. "Got it, Dr. Monroe. Preliminary survey only." The boat was older but well-maintained, with a reliable outboard motor and basic navigation equipment. Cal had refreshed his boating skills with online tutorials. It had been 15 years since he'd operated anything larger than a rowboat, but the fundamentals came back quickly. Growing up near the water had its advantages. They motored out of Mission Bay as the morning sun climbed higher, following GPS coordinates toward the location specified in the naval logbook. The ocean was unusually calm, with gentle swells and excellent underwater visibility. Eli sat at the bow, scanning the horizon with binoculars and monitoring their progress on his phone's GPS app. 2 more miles, he called back to Cal. "The water's getting deeper. We should start seeing the bottom contours change soon." Cal had invested in a basic fish finder with sonar capabilities, hoping it would help them locate any large underwater structures. As they approached the target coordinates, he watched the digital display carefully, noting the gradual change from 60 to 70 to 80 feet of depth. "There," Eli said suddenly, pointing ahead and slightly to starboard. "Do you see that? The watercolor is different." Cal looked where his son was pointing and saw what appeared to be a dark shadow beneath the surface, barely visible but distinct from the surrounding blue-green water. His pulse quickened as he adjusted their course, moving slowly to avoid passing over the anomaly too quickly. The sonar began registering a large structure on the ocean floor, something massive and artificial, clearly not part of the natural seafloor topography. Cal cut the engine and let the boat drift, watching the fish finder display reveal the unmistakable outline of a ship's hull. "My God," he whispered. "It's really there." Eli was practically vibrating with excitement. "Dad, that's huge! Look at the size of it on the sonar. That's definitely a destroyer-class vessel." They dropped anchor carefully, making sure they were positioned directly over what appeared to be the ship's midsection. The water was remarkably clear, and as Cal peered over the side, he could just make out the ghostly outline of metal structures far below. "Okay," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We stick to the plan. I go down first with the underwater camera, take some basic photographs, confirm what we're looking at. You stay on the boat and monitor safety protocols." Eli nodded reluctantly. He'd wanted to dive immediately, but Cal had insisted on proper safety procedures, one person in the water at a time until they understood what they were dealing with. Cal pulled on his wetsuit, checked his diving mask and snorkel, and clipped an underwater flashlight to his weight belt. The camera was a basic waterproof model he'd borrowed from a co-worker. Nothing fancy, but sufficient for documentation purposes. The water was surprisingly warm for October, probably 68 degrees. Cal took several deep breaths and kicked downward, equalizing pressure in his ears as he descended toward the shadowy mass below. The first thing that struck him was how well preserved everything appeared. Unlike the coral-encrusted wrecks he'd seen in photographs, the USS Valiant's hull was relatively clean, covered with only a thin layer of marine growth. The cold Pacific waters and depth had apparently protected the metal from extensive deterioration. As he swam along the ship's length, Cal began to appreciate the vessel's massive size. The destroyer stretched nearly 400 feet from bow to stern, her superstructure still largely intact despite 8 decades underwater. Gun mounts and deck equipment were clearly visible, though many details were obscured by accumulated sediment and marine life. He found what he was looking for near the ship's bridge, a bronze bell mounted on a pedestal, green with patina, but still legible. Swimming closer, Cal could make out the engraved letters, USS Valiant, 1942. This was it. This was really the ship from the logbook. Cal surfaced, treading water beside the boat, while Eli helped pull him back aboard. Both of them were breathing hard with excitement. "It's her," Cal said, pulling off his mask. "The USS Valiant. Everything matches the description in the log." Eli examined the photographs on the camera's small display screen, zooming in on the ship's bell and other identifying features. "Dad, this is incredible. We actually found her." They spent the next hour taking turns diving down to explore different sections of the wreck. The ship lay upright on the sandy bottom, her superstructure rising nearly 40 feet from the seafloor. Most of the upper decks were accessible to free divers, though the interior compartments would require scuba equipment to explore safely. What impressed Cal most was the wreck's condition. While the wooden elements had long since rotted away, the steel hull and major structural components remained solid. Hatches and doorways were still clearly defined, and in several areas they could see into the ship's interior spaces. "Look at this," Eli called out during one of his dives, surfacing near the stern section. "There are cargo holds back here that look completely sealed. The hatches are still closed." Cal felt a flutter of excitement mixed with apprehension. Sealed compartments meant potential for preserved artifacts, but also greater danger. They were approaching the limits of what could be safely explored without proper diving certification and equipment. As the afternoon wore on, they documented as much as possible of the wreck's exterior. The USS Valiant was lying in approximately 75 feet of water, positioned as if she had been deliberately beached and then slid backward into deeper water as the seafloor shifted over the decades. The logbook was right, Cal said, reviewing their photographs. She wasn't stripped clean before being abandoned. Most of her equipment and structure is still here. Eli was studying the images of the sealed cargo holds. Dad, what if there really is stuff down there? What if the official records were wrong and the ship still contains whatever cargo they were transporting? Cal looked at his son's eager face and felt the weight of possibility pressing down on him. They'd found the ship, confirmed its identity, and established that significant portions remained unexplored. The next step would be much more serious, obtaining proper diving equipment and permits, planning careful exploration of the interior spaces. "We need to think about this carefully," he said finally. "What we've found here is historically significant, regardless of what cargo might be aboard. This ship deserves respect, proper documentation, maybe involvement with maritime archaeology. Professionals." "But we found her," Eli protested. "Doesn't that give us some rights?" Cal understood his son's excitement, but he also felt the responsibility of their discovery. The USS Valiant wasn't just a potential source of treasure. It was a grave site, a piece of history, a monument to the men who had served aboard her during wartime. As they prepared to head back to shore, Cal took one last look at the GPS coordinates. On his phone, memorizing the exact position. Tomorrow they would begin the process of researching maritime law, contacting appropriate authorities, and planning their next steps. But tonight, as they motored back toward Mission Bay with the setting, sun painting the ocean gold, Cal allowed himself to feel something he hadn't experienced in years, the pure joy of discovery, shared with his son in pursuit of a mystery that might change both their lives forever. The USS Valiant's bell, captured in digital photographs, seemed to glow with promise in the camera's memory. Whatever secrets the ship held, they were no longer lost to history. Cal and Eli had found her, and that accomplishment alone was worth more than any treasure they might eventually discover in her sealed compartments. The following weekend, Cal and Eli returned to the wreck site with upgraded equipment and carefully laid plans. Cal had spent the week researching diving regulations and maritime salvage law, while also investing in basic scuba gear from a local dive shop. The financial strain was significant, but he'd managed to arrange payment plans for the essential equipment. "Remember what we discussed," Cal said as they anchored over the USS Valiant. "We're conducting systematic exploration, documenting everything we find. No removing artifacts until we understand the legal implications." Eli nodded seriously, adjusting his diving mask. Scientific method, observation, documentation, analysis. The water conditions were even better than the previous week, crystal clear with excellent visibility. Cal went down first, carrying waterproof markers and a slate for taking notes underwater. His goal was to create a basic map of the wreck's accessible areas and identify potential entry points to the interior compartments. Swimming along the ship's port side, he noticed details he'd missed during their initial exploration. The vessel's paint was still visible in protected areas, showing the distinctive grey color scheme of World War II naval vessels. Equipment mounts and deck fittings remained largely intact, creating an almost ghostly impression of a ship that had simply been placed underwater rather than sunk in battle. Near the stern, Cal found what appeared to be a damaged section of hull plating where the metal had buckled and separated, creating a gap large enough for a diver to enter. Inside, he could see into what looked like a storage compartment or crew quarters, though most of the space was filled with sediment. But it was amidships where he made the discovery that changed everything. A sealed ammunition locker about the size of a large toolbox sat wedged between two deck supports near what had been the ship's armory. The metal container appeared to be intact, with its original latching mechanism still functional. According to Cal's underwater research, ammunition lockers were designed to be watertight for obvious safety reasons. He surfaced to share his findings with Eli, who listened with growing excitement. "You think it's still sealed after all these years?" Eli asked. "Only one way to find out. But if we're going to open it, we need to bring it to the surface first, document everything, photograph the recovery process." They spent careful time planning the retrieval. The locker was heavy, probably 60 or 70 pounds, but manageable with proper lifting technique. Cal attached a rope and flotation device, then slowly guided the container to the surface while Eli documented the process with their underwater camera. On the boat deck, they examined their find with the reverence of museum curators. The ammunition. Locker was made of heavy steel with brass fittings, marked with Navy inventory numbers and inspection stamps. Most remarkably, the rubber gasket around the lid appeared to be intact. "Should we open it?" Eli asked, his voice hushed with anticipation. Cal studied the latching mechanism. The container was designed to keep water out. If it's done its job for 80 years, whatever's inside should be preserved. With careful pressure, the latches released with metallic clicks that seemed unusually loud in the ocean's silence. Cal lifted the heavy lid, and both he and Eli peered inside. The locker contained several wrapped packages, each sealed in what appeared to be oilcloth or waterproof material. The top package was small and heavy, about the size of a paperback book. Cal lifted it carefully, noting that the wrapping had protected its contents from water damage. Unwrapping the package revealed a collection of gold coins, each about the size of a silver dollar. They were foreign, not American currency, with inscriptions in what looked like German or Austrian text. The coins showed minimal tarnishing, their gold content having protected them from corrosion. "Holy crap," Eli whispered, then immediately looked apologetic for his language. Cal counted 12 coins, each appearing to be genuine gold, with intricate designs and dates from the early 1940s. Even his limited knowledge of precious metals suggested these were valuable, possibly very valuable. The second package contained more coins, this time a mix of gold and silver pieces from various European countries. The third held what appeared to be jewelry, rings, necklaces, and bracelets that showed signs of fine craftsmanship. "Dad," Eli said quietly, "where do you think this came from?" Cal was wondering the same thing. The mix of currencies and jewelry suggested personal property rather than official military cargo. During World War II, there had been widespread looting and confiscation of valuables from occupied territories. Some of it had been recovered after the war, but much had simply vanished into private collections or government repositories. "I don't know," he admitted, "but we need to research the provenance of these items before we make any decisions about what to do with them." They photographed each item carefully, documenting the coin's markings and the jewelry's design details. Cal's digital camera wasn't sophisticated enough for detailed numismatic photography, but it captured enough information for initial research purposes. The bottom of the locker contained a surprise, a small leather journal wrapped in multiple layers of oilcloth. The preservation was remarkable. The leather was still supple and the pages largely intact. The journal contained handwritten entries in English, apparently personal notes from one of the USS Valiant's crew members. Cal read the first few entries. Aloud, March 15, 1943. Picked up passengers and cargo in Manila. Orders are classified, but the civilian passengers seem nervous about something. Their luggage is unusually heavy for people fleeing combat zones. March 20th, 1943. More cargo loaded. In Mindanao. Captain is asking questions about manifests, but the intelligence officer says everything is authorized. Some of the crew are getting suspicious about what we're really transporting. The entries continued through the ship's final mission, painting. A picture of a vessel involved in something beyond routine military transport. The crew member, identified only by initials JK, expressed growing concern about their cargo and passengers. The final entry was dated September 18, 1943. Ship is taking on water faster than pumps can handle. Captain has decided to beach her rather than lose everything in deep water. The passengers are more worried about their cargo than their lives. Makes me wonder what we've really been carrying all these months." Cal and Eli looked at each other in silence. The journal entries suggested that the USS Valiant had been involved in transporting refugees and their possessions from war zones, possibly including people fleeing with whatever valuables they could carry. "This is bigger than we thought," Cal said finally. "These coins and jewelry might be someone's life savings, family heirlooms they were trying to preserve." Eli nodded thoughtfully. "So what do we do?" It was a good question. Maritime salvage law was complex, especially regarding historical wrecks and potentially stolen property. The coins and jewelry were undoubtedly valuable, but their ownership remained unclear. Were they legitimate refugee possessions or items confiscated from occupied territories? "First, we research everything we can about these specific items," Cal said. "Try to trace their origin. Understand how they ended up on the ship. Then we consult with maritime lawyers and possibly historical preservation societies." "And in the meantime?" Cal looked at the small fortunes spread across their boat. A deck. The gold coins alone were probably worth several $1,000s, maybe more depending on their rarity and condition. It was enough money to solve their immediate financial problems and provide security he hadn't felt since Sarah's death. But he also understood that this discovery came with responsibilities beyond personal gain. In the meantime, we secure everything safely and continue our research. This isn't just about treasure hunting anymore, Eli. We might have found something historically significant. As they carefully rewrapped and secured their finds, Cal felt the weight of their discovery settling over him like a heavy blanket. The coins and jewelry represented possibilities he'd never dared imagine. Freedom from financial stress, opportunities for Eli's education, maybe even a chance to honor Sarah's memory in meaningful ways. But they also represented mysteries and obligations that extended far beyond his understanding. Somewhere, these items had belonged to real people facing desperate circumstances. Their stories deserved respect and careful consideration. The sun was setting as they motored back toward Mission Bay, their small boat carrying secrets that had waited 80 years to be revealed. Tomorrow would bring new questions and difficult decisions. But tonight, Cal allowed himself to feel something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's illness began. Hope that extended beyond the next paycheck, beyond mere survival. The USS Valiant still held more secrets in her sealed compartments, and Cal suspected their first discovery was only the beginning of a much larger mystery. Over the following weeks, Cal and Eli established a routine of weekend diving expeditions to the USS Valiant, each trip revealing new artifacts and deepening the mystery of the ship's final cargo. Cal had invested in better diving equipment and underwater lighting, allowing them to explore previously inaccessible areas of the wreck. It was during their fourth expedition that they made the discovery that would change everything. Working in the ship's lower compartments, Cal had located what appeared to be a sealed storage area near the former officers' quarters. The compartment required careful entry through a partially collapsed doorway, but once inside, his underwater lights revealed something extraordinary. Wrapped in oilcloth and secured in waterproof containers were paintings, actual oil paintings. On canvas, remarkably preserved by the careful packaging and cold water environment. Cal could barely contain his excitement as he carefully transported the first piece to the surface. On the boat deck, with Eli helping to document every step, they unwrapped what appeared to be a Renaissance-era painting of the Madonna and Child. The artwork was small, perhaps 18 inches by 24 inches, but the craftsmanship was exquisite. The colors remained vivid, the brushwork showed masterful technique, and the overall condition was remarkable for something that had been underwater for 8 decades. "Dad," Eli whispered, studying the painting through the camera's LCD screen. "I think this might be really old." like museum-quality old. Cal was thinking the same thing. During Sarah's cancer treatments, they had spent many afternoons at the San Diego Museum of Art, where she found peace in the quiet galleries. Cal had developed an appreciation for Renaissance art during those visits, and this painting showed all the characteristics of genuine period work. The signature in the lower right corner was partially obscured, but it appeared to read something like A. Benedetto, with a date that looked like 1485. If authentic, the painting could be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, possibly more. They found 5 more paintings in the sealed compartment, each wrapped with the same meticulous care. The collection included what appeared to be works from different periods and styles: Renaissance religious scenes, Dutch Golden Age portraits, and what looked like French Impressionist landscapes. The variety suggested a private collection rather than official military cargo. These had to belong to someone fleeing Europe, Cal said, studying photographs of the paintings spread across their kitchen table that evening. Probably Jewish families, or other refugees who managed to escape with their most valuable possessions. Eli was researching the paintings on his laptop, cross-referencing signatures and stylistic elements with online art databases. "Dad, look at this. I think one of these might be by a really famous artist." The Dutch portrait, showing a merchant in elaborate period clothing, bore a signature that resembled J. Vermeer. If authentic, it would be one of fewer than 40 known works by Johannes Vermeer, the 17th century master of light and domestic scenes. Cal stared at the photograph, his heart racing. A genuine Vermeer could be worth tens of millions of dollars. Even if it was only a work by one of his students or followers, it would still represent a significant historical and financial discovery. "We need expert authentication," he said finally. "These paintings are too important to evaluate ourselves." But that raised uncomfortable questions about their legal position. Maritime salvage law was one thing when dealing with coins and jewelry, but artwork of this potential significance involved international treaties, cultural heritage protection, and possibly criminal liability if the paintings had been stolen during the war. Cal had already contacted a maritime lawyer named Rebecca Chen, who specialized in underwater archaeology and salvage rights. She had been cautiously optimistic about their legal position regarding the coins and personal effects, but artwork presented more complex challenges. "The key issue," Chen had explained during their consultation, "is proving legitimate ownership chain and your rights as salvagers. If these paintings were stolen from museums or private collections during the war, they could be subject to repatriation claims regardless of how you found them." That evening, as Cal studied the photographs of their discoveries, he found himself increasingly troubled by the ethical implications. The paintings were undoubtedly valuable, but they also represented someone's desperate attempt to preserve their cultural heritage during one of history's darkest periods. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. Mr. Monroe. The voice was smooth and professional, with a slight accent that might have been European. "My name is Marcus Thornfield. I understand you've been doing some interesting underwater exploration recently." Cal felt a chill run down his spine. "I'm sorry, who is this? I represent certain interests that have been monitoring maritime activity in your area. We're aware of your recent discoveries aboard the USS Valiant, and we'd like to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement." "I don't know what you're talking about," Cal said, though his voice sounded unconvincing even to himself. Thornfield chuckled softly. "Mr. Monroe, please don't insult both our intelligence. You found something that belongs to my clients, and they're prepared to pay handsomely for its return. No questions asked, no legal complications, just a simple business transaction." Cal's mind raced. How could anyone know about their discoveries? They'd been careful to keep everything secret, avoiding marina gossip and storing their finds in a safety deposit box at the bank. "I think you have the wrong person," he said. "I think we both know that's not true. My clients are prepared to offer you $2 million for the artwork you've recovered, plus any related documentation. That's more than enough to solve all." your financial problems and provide security for your son's future. $2 million. The number hit Cal like a physical blow. It was more money than he'd ever imagined having, enough to pay off every debt, buy a house, secure Eli's education through college and beyond. "How do I know you're legitimate?" he asked. "You don't, but you also don't have many alternatives. The artwork you found was stolen from my clients' families during the war. They've been searching for these pieces for decades, and they're willing to pay premium prices for their return." Cal thought about the paintings wrapped carefully in his safety deposit box, about the desperate refugees who had tried to preserve their most precious possessions, about the complex legal and ethical maze he and Eli had stumbled into. "I need to think about this," he said finally. "Of course, but don't take too long, Mr. Monroe. My clients aren't the only ones interested in what you've found. Others might not be as generous or as patient as we are." The line went dead, leaving Cal staring at his phone with a mixture of fear and confusion. How had Thornfield learned about their discoveries? Who were his clients, and what did they really want? More troubling, what did he mean about others being interested? Were there multiple parties tracking their salvage activities? Cal walked to Eli's bedroom, where his son was asleep with art books scattered around him. Even in sleep, Eli's face showed the excitement and wonder that had characterized their recent adventures. The boy had no idea that their innocent treasure hunt had attracted dangerous attention. Standing in the doorway, Cal felt the weight of responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. $2 million could transform their lives, but accepting Thornfield's offer would mean abandoning any hope of properly researching the painting's history or ensuring they were returned to their rightful owners. Sarah would have known what to do. She always had a clear moral compass, an instinctive understanding of right and wrong that had guided their family through difficult decisions. But Sarah was gone, and Cal was left to navigate these treacherous waters alone, with only his love for Eli to guide him. Outside, the harbor lights twinkled in the distance, and somewhere beneath the dark Pacific waters, the USS Valiant held more secrets in her sealed compartments. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and difficult choices, but tonight, Cal could only watch his sleeping son and wonder if their greatest treasure was about to become their greatest danger. The following morning brought unsettling developments that confirmed Cal's worst fears. As he prepared for work, he noticed an unfamiliar black sedan parked across the street from their apartment complex. The car's tinted windows prevented him from seeing the occupants, but he had the distinct feeling of being watched. During his lunch break at the port, Cal's supervisor approached with a puzzled expression. "Cal, there was a guy here this morning asking questions about you. Well-dressed, professional type. Said he was from an insurance company, but something felt off about the whole thing." Cal's stomach tightened. "What kind of questions?" "Your work schedule, how long you've been here, whether you have any other sources of income." I told him to contact HR if he needed employment verification, but he seemed more interested in your personal life. That evening, Cal shared his concerns with Eli over dinner, carefully avoiding the more frightening details about Thornfield's call. "I think we need to be extra careful about our diving activities," he said. "Maybe take a break for a few weeks. Let things cool down." Eli looked disappointed. "But Dad, we haven't finished exploring the ship. There could be more artifacts down there, more pieces of the puzzle." Cal had been thinking the same thing. Their discoveries so far suggested that the USS Valiant had been carrying far more than they'd initially imagined. The sealed compartments they'd identified could contain additional artwork, documents, or other historically significant materials. That night, unable to sleep, Cal made a decision that would prove both crucial and dangerous. He drove to the safety deposit box facility and retrieved one of the smaller paintings, a Renaissance portrait that appeared to be by a lesser-known artist. If he was going to get proper authentication and valuation, he needed to start with something that wouldn't immediately attract international attention. The next morning, he took a personal day from work and drove to La Jolla, where the University of California, San Diego housed one of the region's most respected art history departments. Professor Elena Rodriguez, a specialist in Renaissance art, had agreed to examine the painting after Cal explained that he'd inherited it from a deceased relative. In her office, surrounded by books and reproduction artwork, Professor Rodriguez examined the painting with professional interest. She used magnifying glasses and UV lights to study the brushwork, pigments, and canvas composition. "This is fascinating," she said after an hour of careful examination. "The technique is consistent with late 15th century Venetian school, possibly from the workshop of Andrea Benedetto. The pigments appear to be period appropriate, and the canvas shows aging consistent with genuine antiquity." Cal tried to keep his expression neutral. What would something like this be worth? If authentic, anywhere from $200,000 to $500,000, depending on attribution and provenance. "But Mr. Monroe, I have to ask, do you have documentation for this piece? Chain of ownership, insurance records, anything that establishes its legal history?" That was exactly the question Cal had been dreading. "The family records were lost during the war," he said, sticking to his prepared story. "My grandmother fled Europe in the 1940s and brought very little documentation with her." Professor Rodriguez nodded sympathetically. "Unfortunately, that's not uncommon. Many families lost everything during that period, including records of their possessions. However, there are databases of stolen artwork from World War II that should be checked before any sale or exhibition." She pulled up several websites on her computer, showing extensive catalogues of artwork reported missing or stolen during the Nazi period and its aftermath. The Art Recovery International database, the FBI's Art Crime Team records, and several European cultural heritage organizations maintain lists of works that are still being sought by legitimate owners or their heirs. Cal studied the computer screen, feeling increasingly uncomfortable about the implications. If the paintings from the USS Valiant appeared in any of these databases, his legal position would become untenable regardless of his salvage rights. Professor Rodriguez, hypothetically speaking, what happens if someone discovers artwork that might be connected to wartime displacement? What are their obligations? She gave him a sharp look. "That's a very specific question, Mr. Monroe. Are you concerned about something particular regarding this painting?" Cal chose his words carefully. "I just want to make sure I handle things properly. My family went through enough trauma during the war. I don't want to create additional problems for anyone." The ethical approach would be to research the painting's history thoroughly, check it against stolen art databases, and contact appropriate authorities if there are questions about ownership. Many countries have cultural attachés who specialize in recovering displaced artwork. As Cal drove back toward San Diego, his mind churned with conflicting thoughts. Professor Rodriguez's examination confirmed that the painting was genuinely valuable and historically significant, but it also raised serious questions about ownership and legal obligations. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Hope you're enjoying your research day. Remember that knowledge can be dangerous if shared with the wrong people." Cal nearly swerved off the freeway. Someone was definitely watching him, tracking his movements and activities. The message was clearly a warning, though its exact meaning remained ambiguous. That evening, as he and Eli reviewed photographs from their previous diving expeditions, Cal made a disturbing discovery. Mixed in with their documentation photos were several images they hadn't taken, shots of their boat from a distance, pictures of them loading equipment, even what appeared to be underwater surveillance of their diving activities. "Dad, these aren't ours," Eli said, studying the unfamiliar photos. "Someone's been watching us." Cal felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. Their treasure hunt had attracted attention from multiple parties, some of whom were apparently sophisticated enough to conduct underwater surveillance without being detected. The encrypted military documents they'd found in one of the sealed compartments suddenly took on new significance. Cal had assumed they were routine wartime communications, but what if they contained information that certain people preferred to keep buried? Late that night, after Eli was asleep, Cal carefully examined the documents again. Most were in military code that he couldn't decipher, but several contained names and locations that appeared to reference post-war activities in Europe and South America. One document, dated 1946, contained a list of names with corresponding numbers that looked like bank account codes or asset identifications. Several of the surnames were familiar from prominent American and European families, including what appeared to be early versions of names he recognized from modern business and political contexts. Cal photographed the documents with his phone, then secured the originals back in their protective wrapping. If these papers implicated powerful families in post-war activities involving displaced assets, it would explain the current interest in suppressing their discovery. His phone rang, startling him from his thoughts. The caller ID showed Thornfield's number. "Mr. Monroe, I trust you've had time to consider our offer. I'm still researching my legal obligations," Cal said. "Legal obligations can be expensive and time-consuming to fulfill. My clients are offering a much simpler solution. And if I refuse?" There was a pause. "That would be unfortunate. You have a young son, Mr. Monroe. I'm sure you want to ensure his safety and future security." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Cal felt his hands begin to shake with anger and fear. "Are you threatening my family?" "I'm simply pointing out that the world can be a dangerous place for people who possess things that don't belong to them. My clients are reasonable, but others might not be as patient." The line went dead, leaving Cal staring at his phone with growing dread. Whatever they had discovered aboard the USS Valiant was valuable enough that powerful people were willing to use intimidation and possibly violence to recover it. Standing in his modest kitchen, surrounded by the detritus of their treasure hunt, Cal realized that he and Eli had stumbled into something far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. The paintings and documents weren't just historical artifacts, they were evidence of secrets that certain people had spent decades trying to bury. Tomorrow, he would need to make a decision that could determine not just their financial future, but their safety and possibly their lives. Unable to sleep after Thornfield's threatening call, Cal found himself standing in the closet that had remained largely untouched since Sarah's death 2 years ago. Her clothes still hung there, along with boxes of personal items he'd never found the strength to sort through. Tonight, driven by desperation and growing paranoia, he decided it was time to confront those painful memories. The first box contained the expected items: jewelry, photographs, letters from friends and family. But in the second box, tucked beneath Sarah's nursing school textbooks, Cal discovered a manila folder labeled Research Personal in his wife's careful handwriting. Inside were photocopied documents, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes that made Cal's blood run cold. Sarah had been investigating the USS Valiant years before her death, apparently researching the ship's final mission and the mysterious circumstances surrounding its abandonment. The earliest notes were dated 3 years ago, about 6 months before Sarah's cancer diagnosis. She had been researching her own family history, tracing her grandmother's immigration from Austria in 1943. According to Sarah's notes, her grandmother Anna Kellner had fled Vienna with a small group of refugees, eventually reaching the Philippines before being evacuated aboard an American naval vessel. Cal's hands trembled as he read Sarah's careful documentation. Anna Kellner had been traveling with her husband's extensive art collection, paintings and artifacts that the family had accumulated over generations of dealing in fine arts and antiquities. The collection included works by Vermeer, Renaissance masters, and other pieces that perfectly matched what Cal and Eli had been finding aboard the USS Valiant. But the most shocking revelation was in Sarah's final notes, dated just 2 months before her cancer diagnosis. She had discovered that her grandmother's ship had been the USS Valiant, and that the vessel had never been properly salvaged as claimed in official records. Sarah had been planning her own expedition to locate the wreck when she became ill. Margin notes in Sarah's handwriting grew increasingly urgent as her research progressed. She had identified several powerful families who had been involved in acquiring displaced artwork during the war's aftermath, including detailed financial records showing how stolen pieces had been laundered through private collections and eventually donated to museums for tax benefits. One name appeared repeatedly in Sarah's notes: Thornfield. Marcus Thornfield's grandfather, Heinrich Thornfield, had been an American intelligence officer stationed in Europe during the war's final months. According to Sarah's research, Heinrich had been involved in recovering displaced assets, but significant quantities of artwork and valuables had never made it to their intended destinations. The most damning document was a photocopy of a 1947 letter from Heinrich Thornfield to an associate, discussing the permanent solution to the Valiant problem. The letter suggested that Heinrich had deliberately falsified salvage records to hide the ship's valuable cargo, planning to return for it at a later date. Cal felt sick as the implications became clear. Sarah hadn't developed cancer randomly. She had been murdered, probably poisoned, to prevent her from exposing a decades-old conspiracy involving stolen artwork and powerful families. The timing was too coincidental to ignore. His phone buzzed with another text message. Found some interesting reading material? Your wife was very thorough in her research. Too thorough. Cal's vision blurred with rage and grief. They had killed Sarah to protect their secret, and now they were threatening Eli to maintain their silence. The $3 thrift store book hadn't been a coincidence. Someone had planted it there, knowing Cal would buy it for his son, hoping to draw them into a trap that would allow recovery of the remaining artwork. But there was more in Sarah's research folder. Hidden in the back was a small digital camera memory card and a note. Cal, if something happens to me, this contains everything I've found. The truth about the Valiant and what really happened to the artwork. Give it to someone who can ensure justice. All my love, S. With shaking hands, Cal inserted the memory card into his laptop. The files contained hundreds of photographs documenting the conspiracy, financial records, correspondence between conspirators, and most importantly, images of the stolen artwork in private collections and museums around the world. Sarah had been building a comprehensive case against Heinrich Thornfield's network, documenting how they had systematically looted displaced artwork and covered their tracks through falsified records and eliminated witnesses. The USS Valiant had been just one source of their illegal acquisitions. Cal spent the rest of the night reading through Sarah's research, understanding for the first time the scope of what they had stumbled into. This wasn't just about treasure, hunting, or maritime salvage. It was about exposing a criminal conspiracy that had lasted decades and involved some of the most powerful families in America and Europe. As dawn broke, Cal made copies of everything and secured the originals in multiple locations. He also wrote detailed letters explaining the situation, addressing them to journalists, law enforcement agencies, and cultural heritage organizations. If anything happened to him and Eli, the truth would still come out. When Eli woke up, Cal sat him down for the most difficult conversation of their lives. Son, we need to talk about your mother and what really happened to her. As Cal explained Sarah's research and the dangerous truth they had uncovered, he watched his son's expression transform from confusion to anger to determined resolve. So Mom was murdered because she found out about the stolen art, Eli said finally, and they think they can scare us into giving up everything she worked for. Cal nodded grimly. The question is, what do we do now? We could take Thornfield's money and disappear, try to start over somewhere safe, or we could finish what your mother started and make sure the truth comes out. Eli was quiet for a long moment, staring at the photograph of Sarah that sat on the kitchen counter. When he looked up, His young face showed a maturity beyond his 10 years. Mum always said that doing the right thing is usually the hardest thing. She spent months researching this because she believed the truth mattered. We can't just let them win because we're scared. Cal felt a surge of pride in his son, mixed with terror at the danger they would face. But Eli was right. Sarah had died, trying to expose this conspiracy, and they owed it to her memory to see it through. "Okay," Cal said, "but we do this smart. We document everything, make multiple copies, and ensure that the truth gets out regardless of what happens to us." As they prepared for what might be their final expedition to the USS Valiant, Cal felt Sarah's presence guiding them. She had started this investigation to honor her grandmother's memory and expose the truth about stolen artwork. Now it was up to Cal and Eli to finish what she had begun, no matter the cost. The black sedan was still, parked across the street, a constant reminder of the danger they faced. But inside their modest apartment, surrounded by Sarah's research and their own discoveries, Cal and Eli Monroe prepared to take on one of the most powerful and ruthless criminal conspiracies in modern history. The USS Valiant still held secrets in her sealed compartments, but the most important truth had been hidden in their own home all along. The next 3 days were a carefully orchestrated dance of preparation and deception. Cal continued his normal work routine while secretly making copies of Sarah's research and their own discoveries, distributing them to safety deposit boxes, trusted friends, and his lawyer, Rebecca Chen. He also arranged for automatic email distribution of the evidence if he and Eli failed to check in within specific timeframes. Eli, meanwhile, had thrown himself into the technical aspects of their plan with the focused intensity he usually reserved for marine archaeology research. Using his school's computer lab and public library resources, he had researched underwater photography equipment, digital storage systems, and secure communication methods. "Dad, look at this," Eli said, showing Cal a waterproof camera system he'd found online. "It has real-time streaming capability and automatic cloud backup. If we can get this down to the wreck, we can broadcast whatever we find directly to the internet." The idea was brilliant. Rather than simply documenting their discoveries for later revelation, they could expose everything in real time, making it impossible for Thornfield's organization to suppress or discredit their findings. Cal had managed to acquire the camera system through an overnight delivery service, using money from their treasure discoveries to purchase equipment that might save their lives. The irony wasn't lost on him. They were using the conspiracy's own stolen gold to expose their crimes. Wednesday evening, Thornfield called again, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Mr. Monroe, my clients are growing concerned about your continued delays. We had hoped this matter could be resolved amicably." "I need more time," Cal said, trying to sound genuinely conflicted. "This is a big decision. $2 million is life-changing money." "Indeed it is. But the offer won't remain available indefinitely. My clients have other methods of recovery if necessary." Cal gritted his teeth. "I understand. Give me until this weekend. I'll have an answer for you by Sunday." "Very well. But Mr. Monroe, please don't make the mistake of thinking you can outsmart people who have been managing situations like this for decades." That night, Cal and Eli made their final preparations. They had planned their expedition for Saturday morning, using the cover of an apparently normal diving trip to conduct what they hoped would be the conclusive exploration of the USS Valiant. The streaming camera would document everything they found, while backup systems would ensure the evidence survived, even if they didn't. Cal had also arranged for additional insurance. A maritime archaeologist named Dr. James Fletcher from the Scripps Institution would be monitoring their live stream remotely, ready to contact authorities if anything went wrong. Fletcher was a colleague of Professor Rodriguez, who specialized in underwater cultural heritage and had agreed to serve as their expert witness. Friday morning brought an unexpected development. Cal was loading equipment into his truck when a woman approached from the sidewalk, middle-aged, professionally dressed, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "Mr. Monroe? I'm Agent Lisa Santos with the FBI's art crime team. I believe we need to talk." Cal's heart hammered as he tried to maintain his composure. "I'm sorry, I don't understand." Santos showed her credentials, which appeared genuine. "We've been monitoring communications related to stolen artwork from World War II. Your name has come up in connection with certain individuals we've been investigating." It took Cal a moment to realize that this was actually good news. The FBI's involvement suggested that Thornfield's organization was already under scrutiny and that law enforcement was aware of the conspiracy. "Agent Santos, I think there are some things you need to know about the USS Valiant and what we found aboard her." Over the next 2 hours, Cal shared everything: Sarah's research, their own discoveries, Thornfield's threats, and their planned Saturday expedition. Santos listened with professional interest, taking detailed notes and asking pointed questions about specific evidence. "Mr. Monroe, you and your son have stumbled into the middle of an investigation that's been ongoing for 3 years. The Thornfield organization is suspected of involvement in art theft, money laundering, and several suspicious deaths of researchers who got too close to their activities." Cal felt vindicated and terrified simultaneously. "So you believe Sarah was murdered?" "We believe it's possible. The timing of her illness, combined with the thoroughness of her research, certainly raises questions. But proving murder by poisoning after 2 years is nearly impossible without physical evidence." Santos studied the photographs of the encrypted military documents Cal and Eli had found. "These could be the breakthrough we need. If they contain financial records or communication between conspirators, they could provide the evidence necessary to bring charges." "What about tomorrow's dive?" Cal asked. "We were planning to do a complete exploration of the remaining sealed compartments." Santos was quiet for a moment, apparently weighing options. "Normally I'd advise against civilian involvement in an active investigation. But your live streaming idea is actually brilliant. It creates a public record that can't be suppressed or discredited." She pulled out a small device that looked like a waterproof radio. "Emergency beacon with GPS tracking. If you get into trouble, activate this, and we'll have Coast Guard assets on scene within 15 minutes. We'll also have agents monitoring your stream and ready to move if Thornfield's people try to interfere." As Agent Santos prepared to leave, she turned back with a final warning. "Mr. Monroe, these people have killed to protect their secret. Don't underestimate their willingness to escalate if they feel cornered." That evening, as Cal and Eli made final preparations for their expedition, both felt the weight of what they were about to attempt. They were going to expose a decades-old criminal conspiracy, honor Sarah's memory, and potentially risk their lives in the process. "Dad," Eli said as they checked their equipment one final time, "are you scared?" Cal considered lying, trying to project confidence he didn't feel, but Eli deserved honesty, especially now. "Terrified," he admitted, "but your mother always said that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right, despite being afraid." Eli nodded thoughtfully. "She would have wanted us to finish what she started." "She would have been proud of you," Cal said, ruffling his son's hair. "You've shown more courage and wisdom than most adults I know." Outside, the black sedan had been replaced by an unmarked van, presumably FBI surveillance. Tomorrow they would have law enforcement protection, but they would also be completely exposed once they reached the wreck site. Cal spent part of the evening writing letters to Eli, messages to be delivered on future birthdays, graduations, and other milestones, in case tomorrow's expedition was their last adventure together. It was morbid preparation, but necessary given the stakes involved. As he sealed the letters and placed them with his important papers, Cal reflected on how much their lives had changed since that evening when he'd bought a $3 book from Mrs. Peterson's thrift store. What had started as a simple gesture to encourage his son's dreams had led them to the center of an international conspiracy involving stolen artwork, powerful families, and his wife's murder. But it had also brought them closer together, given them a shared purpose beyond simple survival. Regardless of what happened tomorrow, they had honored Sarah's memory and fought for justice against seemingly impossible odds. The USS Valiant waited in the Pacific darkness, holding the final pieces of evidence they needed to expose the truth. Tomorrow, Cal and Eli would descend into those cold waters one last time, carrying Sarah's research and their own courage into battle against forces that had operated in shadows for decades. As Eli fell asleep, with diving manuals spread across his bed, Cal sat in Sarah's old chair and held her wedding ring, drawing strength from the weight of it in his palm. Tomorrow they would finish what she had started, no matter the cost. Saturday morning dawned grey and windy, with 3-foot swells and marginal diving conditions. Cal might have postponed the expedition under normal circumstances, but time was running out. Thornfield expected an answer by Sunday, and the FBI surveillance couldn't be maintained indefinitely without arousing suspicion. As they loaded their equipment at the marina, Cal noticed several unfamiliar faces among the usual weekend boaters. Agent Santos had mentioned additional surveillance, but he couldn't tell which observers were FBI and which might be Thornfield's people. "Live stream is active," Eli announced, checking the camera system's status on his waterproof tablet. "Doctor, Fletcher is monitoring from Scripps, and Agent Santos has the backup feed." Cal started the boat engine and headed toward the coordinates that had become as familiar as his home address. The USS Valiant lay waiting 12 miles offshore, holding secrets that had remained buried for 80 years. Halfway to the site, they noticed another boat following at a distance, a larger sport fishing vessel that maintained steady pace with them. Through binoculars, Cal could see at least 3 men aboard, none of whom appeared to be fishing. "Dad, we've got company," Eli said, pointing to the pursuing vessel. Cal activated the emergency beacon Agent Santos had provided. If Thornfield's people were planning to interfere, law enforcement needed advance warning. As they approached the wreck site, the weather began to deteriorate. Wind gusts reached 20 knots, and the swells increased to 4 feet. Diving in these conditions would be challenging and dangerous, but Cal suspected that was exactly what Thornfield was counting on. They anchored over the USS Valiant as the other boat positioned itself several hundred yards away, close enough to observe but far enough to avoid direct confrontation. Cal could see men with cameras and what appeared to be diving equipment preparing for their own water entry. "They're going to try to stop us," Cal said, checking his diving gear one final time. "Not if we get there first," Eli replied, adjusting the live streaming camera. "Once we're broadcasting from inside the ship, they can't suppress what we find." Cal went over the side first, fighting the current and surface chop as he descended toward the familiar outline of the destroyer. The streaming camera provided clear video to their surface monitors and the remote observers, documenting every moment of their approach. Inside the ship's lower compartments, Cal navigated to areas they had identified but not yet explored. Sealed sections near the captain's quarters that had resisted their previous entry attempts. Today, equipped with better tools and desperate urgency, he managed to force open a watertight door that had been sealed since 1943. The compartment beyond contained the discovery that would change everything. Stacked carefully against the bulkheads were dozens of wooden crates, each marked with inventory numbers and destination codes. But more importantly, lying on the captain's desk in a waterproof document case was the ship's final logbook, the captain's personal record of the USS Valiant's last mission. Cal brought the logbook to the camera, reading the entries aloud for the live stream audience. September 15th, 1943. Took aboard passengers and cargo in Manila. Passengers claim to be refugees, but their paperwork raises questions. Cargo manifests. don't match actual contents, significantly more valuable materials than listed. September 18th, 1943. Intelligence Officer Lieutenant Thornfield has been communicating with unknown parties via encrypted radio. Crew is growing suspicious about the true nature of our mission. September 20th, 1943. Discovered that Lieutenant Thornfield has been systematically looting refugee possessions, replacing valuable items with worthless substitutes. Confronted him privately, he claims he's operating under orders from Washington. September 22nd, 1943. Ship taking on water after storm damage. Lieutenant Thornfield, more concerned about securing cargo than passenger safety, made decision to beach vessel rather than risk total loss. Thornfield objected strenuously. Cal's hands shook as he read the final entry, dated September 23rd, 1943. Lieutenant Thornfield has murdered 2 crew members who threatened to report his activities. He plans to falsify salvage records and return for the cargo after the war. I've hidden this log and evidence of his crimes in the sealed compartments. If anything happens to me, whoever finds this will know the truth. God help us all. The captain's confession was being broadcast live to dozens of viewers, including law enforcement agencies and maritime historians. There could be no cover-up or suppression of this evidence. But as Cal surfaced to share his findings with Eli, he saw that the other boat had moved much closer. Armed men in diving gear were entering the water, clearly intending to stop their investigation by force. Eli, we need to move fast, Cal said, hauling himself back onto their boat. Get the camera system ready for the final compartment. The wooden crates Cal had found contained more stolen artwork, personal jewelry, and documents that would provide definitive proof of the conspiracy. But recovering them would require multiple trips underwater while Thornfield's men closed in. As Cal prepared for his second dive, he heard the sound of approaching helicopters. Coast Guard aircraft appeared on the horizon, responding to his earlier emergency beacon activation. Agent Santos had kept her promise. Law enforcement was en route. But the men from the other boat were already in the water, swimming rapidly toward the wreck site. Cal had minutes at most to retrieve the most crucial evidence before the confrontation began. He grabbed the emergency air supply and waterproof evidence bag, kissing Eli quickly before going over the side again. Keep the camera rolling no matter what happens, he told his son. The world needs to see this. As Cal descended toward the USS Valiant for what might be the final time, he carried with him not just diving equipment, but the hopes of every family whose treasures had been stolen, every researcher who had died seeking the truth, and his wife's memory. The destroyer's hull loomed in the murky water below, a steel monument to secrets that had been hidden too long. Today, finally, the truth would surface. Cal reached the sealed compartment just as the first of Thornfield's divers arrived at the wreck. Through the murky water, he could see 2 men approaching with underwater cutting tools, clearly intending to destroy evidence rather than recover it. Working frantically, Cal loaded the waterproof evidence bag with the most crucial documents from the captain's desk: financial records, correspondence, and photographs that proved the scope of Heinrich Thornfield's wartime looting operation. The live streaming camera captured everything, broadcasting to the surface and the worldwide audience that was now watching their desperate race against time. Above them, Eli maintained the boat's position despite increasingly rough seas, keeping the camera feed active and monitoring the approaching Coast Guard helicopters. His young voice provided steady narration for the stream, explaining what viewers were seeing with the precision of a trained marine archaeologist. Dad's in the captain's quarters now, Eli reported to the camera. The sealed compartment contains evidence that's been preserved for 80 years. You can see the other divers trying to interfere, but they're too late. Everything is already being broadcast live. Underwater, Cal found himself in a deadly game of cat and mouse. The Thornfield divers had powerful underwater lights and professional equipment, but Cal knew the USS Valiant's layout better than they did. He used the ship's twisted corridors and damaged compartments to stay ahead of his pursuers while gathering as much evidence as possible. In one of the wooden crates, Cal made his most important discovery, a small leather portfolio containing Heinrich Thornfield's personal notes and photographs, documenting his systematic theft of refugee property. The portfolio included images of stolen artwork, lists of victims, and detailed plans for laundering the proceeds through post-war legitimate businesses. But most damning of all was a photograph showing Heinrich Thornfield with several prominent American and European officials, apparently celebrating the success of their operation. The faces included men Cal recognized from Sarah's research. Powerful families whose descendants still controlled major businesses and political positions. As Cal secured the portfolio in his evidence bag, one of the Thornfield divers appeared behind him, wielding an underwater knife. The man's intentions were clear: eliminate the witness and destroy the evidence. Cal barely managed to dodge the attack, using his intimate knowledge of the wreck to escape through a damaged section of hull plating. But the encounter cost precious time and air supply. His pressure gauge showed he was approaching dangerous levels. On the surface, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The Thornfield boat had moved within 50 yards of Cal and Eli's position, and armed men were clearly visible on deck. The Coast Guard helicopters were still minutes away, too far to prevent immediate violence. Eli grabbed the emergency radio Agent Santos had provided. "Mayday! Mayday! This is the diving vessel Monroe at coordinates 32 degrees 39 minutes north. We are under attack by armed individuals attempting to suppress evidence of federal crimes. Request immediate assistance." The response was immediate. "Monroe, this is Coast Guard Rescue. We have your position. Maintain current location. Do not attempt to flee. Federal agents are en route to your position." But before help could arrive, the men from the Thornfield boat opened fire with what appeared to be automatic weapons, sending bullets cutting through the water around Cal and Eli's vessel. It was no longer a subtle operation. They were willing to commit murder in broad daylight to protect their secrets. Eli dove for cover behind the boat's console, keeping the camera running even as bullets shattered the windscreen around him. His calm narration never wavered, providing crucial evidence for the live stream audience that now included law enforcement agencies across multiple countries. "They're shooting at us," Eli reported matter-of-factly to the camera. "This proves how desperate they are to hide the truth about the stolen artwork and my mother's murder." Underwater, Cal heard the gunfire and realized he was running out of time. His air supply was critically low, but he made one final dive to the deepest accessible compartment of the USS Valiant. There, in what had been the ship's safe, he found the ultimate proof: Heinrich Thornfield's personal confession, written in his own hand and sealed in a waterproof container. The document detailed everything: the systematic murder of refugees to steal their possessions, the falsification of military records, the post-war money laundering operation, and most importantly, a complete list of everyone involved in the conspiracy, including prominent families whose descendants still controlled major corporations and political positions. As Cal surfaced with the confession, the Coast Guard helicopters finally arrived, their machine guns immediately trained on the Thornfield vessel. The shooting stopped abruptly as the attackers realized they were now facing federal law enforcement with overwhelming firepower. "This is the United States Coast Guard," came the amplified voice from the helicopters. "All vessels maintain current positions. Anyone who moves will be considered hostile." Agent Santos's voice crackled over the emergency radio. "Monroe, this is Santos. We have multiple federal agencies responding to your position. Continue streaming everything you've found. This evidence is going to bring down one of the largest criminal conspiracies in modern history." Cal hauled himself aboard their boat, exhausted but triumphant. In his waterproof evidence bag was proof that would vindicate Sarah's research, expose Heinrich Thornfield's crimes, and ensure that the Stolen artwork would finally be returned to its rightful owners or their heirs. As federal agents boarded the Thornfield vessel and placed the gunman under arrest, Cal and Eli continued their live broadcast, showing the world the documents and artifacts they had recovered from the USS Valiant. The captain's confession, Heinrich's personal records, and the photographs of stolen artwork created an undeniable record of crimes that had been hidden for 8 decades. The most emotional moment came when Cal found, tucked inside Heinrich's confession, a small locket containing a photograph of Sarah's grandmother, Anna Kellner. Written on the back in faded ink was a simple message: "For my granddaughter Sarah, so she will know the truth." Anna had somehow managed to hide evidence of Heinrich's crimes before her death, ensuring that someday her family would be able to expose the conspiracy and recover their stolen heritage. Sarah's research had been guided by her grandmother's final gift, leading inevitably to this moment of revelation. As the Coast Guard escorted both boats back to shore, Cal and Eli sat together in the afternoon sun, surrounded by evidence that would reshape understanding of World War II art theft and post-war criminal conspiracies. The live stream had been watched by millions of people worldwide, creating a permanent record that could never be suppressed or discredited. The USS Valiant had finally given up her secrets, and Sarah Monroe's murder had been avenged by the truth she had died trying to expose. 6 months later, Cal Monroe stood in the sunny courtyard of their new home in La Jolla, watching Eli practice his diving techniques in the backyard swimming pool. The boy moved through the water with increasing confidence, preparing for his acceptance into the prestigious Scripps Institution's Youth Marine Archaeology program. The legal battles had been swift and decisive once the evidence from the USS Valiant became public. Heinrich Thornfield's confession, broadcast live to millions of viewers, had triggered international investigations that resulted in the largest art repatriation effort since the end of World War II. Marcus Thornfield and 17 associates were facing federal charges for conspiracy, murder, and art theft, while dozens of stolen pieces were being returned to museums and surviving family members. Cal had been awarded salvage rights to the monetary treasures aboard the USS Valiant, including the gold coins and jewelry that had originally belonged to refugees like Sarah's grandmother. The financial windfall wasn't the $25 million they'd joked about, but it was enough to secure their future and honor Sarah's memory in meaningful ways. The Sarah Monroe Foundation, established with proceeds from the salvage, was dedicated to supporting families of researchers who died under suspicious circumstances while investigating art theft and cultural heritage crimes. The foundation had already provided assistance to 12 families and was funding ongoing investigations into similar cases worldwide. "Dad, watch this!" Eli called out, executing a perfect surface dive that would have made his mother proud. His acceptance letter to the Marine Archaeology program lay on the patio table beside Cal's coffee, along with scholarship documentation that would cover his education through graduate school. Dr. Fletcher from Scripps had become both a mentor and friend, helping Eli develop his scientific interests while ensuring he understood the ethical responsibilities that came with underwater archaeology. The boy's natural curiosity and careful documentation skills during the USS Valiant investigation had impressed professionals throughout the maritime heritage community. Cal's own life had transformed in ways he couldn't have imagined. The Port Authority had offered him a position as maritime heritage consultant, working with law enforcement and cultural organizations to identify and protect underwater archaeological sites. It was meaningful work that honored both his practical skills and his family's experience with historical discovery. The USS Valiant herself had been designated a protected archaeological site, with ongoing research coordinated by an international team of historians and marine archaeologists. The ship would remain underwater, serving as both a memorial to the refugees who had trusted her with their precious possessions and a testament to the importance of preserving historical truth. Agent Santos visited regularly, updating them on the ongoing prosecutions and international investigations triggered by their discovery. The Thornfield conspiracy had extended far beyond art theft, involving money laundering, political corruption, and systematic elimination of witnesses across multiple decades. The evidence you and Eli recovered has opened investigations in 12 countries, Santos had explained during her most recent visit. We're finding connections to unsolved murders, missing artwork, and financial crimes going back to the 1940s. Your wife's research was the key that unlocked everything. This afternoon, Cal and Eli were preparing for a special ceremony at the San Diego Maritime Museum, where a permanent exhibit about the USS Valiant and refugee art preservation would be dedicated in Sarah's honor. The display would feature Heinrich Thornfield's confession, the ship's recovered artifacts, and Sarah's research notes, ensuring that future visitors would understand both the historical significance of wartime art theft and the courage required to expose such crimes. As they drove to the museum, Eli studied the program for the dedication ceremony. Distinguished guests included survivors of families whose artwork had been recovered, museum directors from around the world, and government officials involved in international cultural heritage protection. "Mom would have loved this," Eli said, looking at the photograph of Sarah that would be displayed prominently in the exhibit. "She would have been proud of you," Cal replied. "Your courage and scientific thinking made all of this possible. She always knew you were destined for great things." The ceremony itself was deeply moving, with speakers sharing stories about the importance of recovering stolen cultural heritage and honoring the memories of refugees who had lost everything but their hope for justice. Cal and Eli sat in the front row, holding hands as various officials praised their investigation and its international impact. But the most meaningful moment came when Anna Kellner's locket, Sarah's grandmother's final message, was placed in the exhibit's centerpiece display. The small piece of jewelry represented the unbroken connection between past and present, between a desperate refugee's hope and her family's eventual vindication. After the ceremony, Cal and Eli walked along the harbor waterfront, watching boats move in and out of the marina where their adventure had begun. The USS Valiant lay 12 miles offshore, no longer a source of mystery, but a protected monument to historical truth and family courage. "What's our next expedition?" Eli asked, his eyes already scanning the horizon for new possibilities. Cal smiled, remembering Sarah's belief that the best adventures begin when you least expect them. "I don't know yet, but I have a feeling the ocean has more stories to tell us, and we'll be ready to listen." As the sun set over San Diego Bay, painting the water gold and crimson, Cal felt Sarah's presence in the warm evening breeze. They had finished what she started, honored her memory, and ensured that truth had prevailed over power and secrecy. The certificate in Eli's scholarship folder represented more than educational opportunity. It was proof that dreams could survive tragedy, that justice could emerge from darkness, and that sometimes the most important treasures aren't gold or artwork, but the courage to stand up for what's right. The USS Valiant had given up her secrets, but she had also given Cal and Eli something more valuable than any monetary treasure: the knowledge that they could face any challenge together, guided by love, truth, and the unbreakable bonds of family. In his pocket, Cal still carried Sarah's wedding ring, not as a reminder of loss, but as a symbol of continuing love and shared purpose. Their greatest adventure was just beginning.